Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So I'll admit, before the Super Bowl, I barely knew who Bad Bunny was. I don't know about you. I'd seen him on some movies and SNL, but I couldn't not name a single song that he sang. And I even tried to listen to a few tracks beforehand, but as we learn in our tradition, the world wasn't created just for me. Not everything is meant for everyone. It's okay. But the halftime show, in my eyes, it was different. I was watching with our family and some of our son's friends, and the beat and the visuals, it actually pulled me back to my childhood. It reminded me of riding on the Metro Rail with my mother in Government Center, or the backyard barbecues we would have with her Cuban coworkers. Of course, a big pig on a spit, which we never ate. But one of the things that I always remember is the music. Always the music and the beat. And as we were leading up to this controversial Super Bowl, many dismissed it as un-American. But growing up in Miami, and has anyone ever been to Puerto Rico before? Raise your hand. I never experienced Latin culture as being un-American. I used US dollars in Puerto Rico. I showed a driver's license to get there. And for me, that kind of multi-ethnic and multilingual society, that felt like America to me. And that's why I was so uplifted the next day, not expecting this feeling. And so I wrote a quick Facebook post. I'm going to share a little bit with you today. I said I grew up in Miami, born and raised. As a rabbi in South Florida, that alone sometimes gets looks of surprise. Who is actually born here in South Florida? Let me ask you, who's born here in South Florida? Raise your hand. Yeah. Well, one of the things I never talked about what it was like growing up in Miami. And I wrote that people look at me now and see white, a white person. But my story was not that different from my Cuban friends whose parents fled communism and oppression to come to the same city that my family escaped tyranny for. They came with very little, and so did we. My mother, of blessed memory, Rachel Baum, believed deeply in Miami-Dade. And she was the first female finance director in Miami-Dade history, the longest tenured. And she was surrounded by Cuban Americans and other Hispanic colleagues who were like family to us, and still are. There were 4 languages of my childhood: English at home and on TV, Yiddish at my grandparents' house, who raised us during the day, Hebrew at school, and then Spanish everywhere else. And so I found it fascinating that people were clamoring for a real American halftime show featuring Coldplay, Mick Jagger, or Paul McCartney. All iconic. None born in America, even if they're citizens now. Meanwhile, Bad Bunny, who sparked so much debate, was actually born in America. And I wrote, the halftime show felt like my childhood. It felt like America, not the America that everyone else grew up in. And I guess that's kind of the point. So the comments started coming in. Some people who knew my mother from her work, and strangers who I never met. By Thursday, the post had reached 260,000 people. And I even shared the exact same words on Instagram, but no one saw it. Because sometimes it's just about timing. In that moment, something opened up, I think, in this country. That people who grew up in a very different version of America heard a piece of themselves in the story. Sometimes the barriers that separate us can suddenly just disappear, just like that. A long time ago, when I was a rabbinical student, I found myself on a bus to Albany with domestic workers who were advocating for a domestic workers' bill of rights. And I sat next to a woman in her 50s or 60s, Caribbean, and a person of color. She was a mother, someone whose life looked nothing like mine. And we had 2.5 hours with no phones, and so we had no choice but to talk to each other. And at first, I kept thinking, what do I possibly have in common with this stranger? And guess what? She definitely thought the same thing about me. But after about an hour, something shifted. In many ways, when she told me her story, I heard my grandmother's story. Her name is on the wall, my grandmother Etta. She was a Holocaust survivor, came here with my father, who's here today, alone. My grandfather was stuck in Europe. For years, she had her son. She slept on a basement floor with just a down blanket, and she was a domestic worker, just like this woman. And as I heard her story, I also heard mine, our story. And it's because of their struggles and hard work that I do not know one thing: what it is like to be a stranger in a strange land. So if I don't know what it is to be a stranger in a strange land, then how should I treat strangers? In this parasha, which we read today, Mishpatim, we read a lot of laws, a flood of rules. Immediately after Sinai, the question is why? And the answer is because we as Jews have short memories. We forgot Sinai right away, so they had to give us laws. And in this parsha, we encounter the first mentions of the stranger as law, a theme that the Torah returns again and again to. It mentions the laws of how we treat the stranger 36 times, more so than any other mitzvah in the entire Torah. And I thought about what it's like to live here in South Florida. Remember I asked how many here were born here? We live in a place where among people whose journeys began somewhere else. Now, for a lot of you, that was in New York. But for some of us, it could be Poland, could be Cuba, could be Venezuela, could be any one of a number of countries. And each one of us carries a different story of what it means to be a stranger. What's happening everywhere else in this country, it also affects us here. Last week I heard from an acquaintance that a white van pulled up to her house and took 2 of her lawn workers away. You can guess who it was. We cannot deny the elephant that is in the room or in this country. The last weeks of ICE raids happening everywhere, including here. They seem to have ended. But these last few weeks will have ripple effects on our citizens that we cannot imagine. Because you see, Mishpatim, it doesn't command us to love the stranger because we understand the stranger. It commands us to love the stranger because we remember what it was like to be powerless. And here's the truth I had to confront this week. I don't know what it feels like to be a stranger in a strange land. But my grandparents did. My mother did. The woman on the bus did. And the people taken in that white van might. So if I don't know that feeling, how do I fulfill the mitzvah? Now our tradition answers with a voice from the 19th century. Rabbi Eliezer Papo, he wrote in his book, the Pele Yoetz, which is a book of Musar. He explains and expands the mitzvah of loving the ger beyond conversion, which is how many of our rabbis looked at the ger. They said they were a convert. But he says something different. He says, and included in the commandment of loving the stranger is helping a person who wanders far from home and lives in a foreign land. It is not limited to converts alone. As it is written, for you know the feelings of the stranger, quoting this week's parsha. The verse speaks of one who lives without companion or brother, whose spirit is lowly and whose heart is broken. It is fitting to have mercy upon such a person, to bring them close, to be their friend and companion, and to support them in all that comes their way. And in doing so, one fulfills this great commandment. And then I remembered something from a trip that we made to Bad Bunny's Island, Puerto Rico. When we were in San Juan, we visited the Capitol, and in front of the Capitol, there's a Holocaust memorial. And you'll see silhouettes of people, men, women, children. And I thought, why is there a Holocaust memorial in front of the Capitol in San Juan? So alongside the memory of the 6 million Jews murdered in the Shoah, there's a section honoring 17 Puerto Rican tourists, Christian pilgrims, who were murdered in a terrorist attack at the Lod airport in Israel in 1972. And suddenly something hit me. It wasn't just a Jewish memorial. It was a place where two histories of loss touched each other. People who were not Jewish chose to carry Jewish memory because they understood something about grief, about vulnerability, and what it feels like when your world changes in a single moment because of who you were born with or who you decide to be with. And I thought back to the Peleiotes. The mitzvah of loving the stranger, it's not just about the convert. It's about anyone whose heart is lowly, whose spirit feels alone, who walks through a world that does not always feel like home. And a halftime show that sounded foreign to some felt like home to me. And a Facebook post that I meant for friends reached strangers that I will never meet, and it impacted them in ways I never imagined. And a woman on a bus originally from the Caribbean carried the echo of my Hungarian grandmother's journey. And in Puerto Rico, a memorial taught me that sometimes others carry Jewish memories because they recognize their own story inside of ours. The Torah says, "You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt." But maybe, just maybe, there's a deeper truth here. Sometimes we learn the soul of the stranger when we allow someone else's story to expand our idea of what home looks like. You don't have to understand every beat of the music. You don't have to understand every experience. You don't even have to agree about everything. But Mishpatim asks us to remember that once we too were strangers. And if we remember that, the laws, they stop being just rules on a page. They become a way of building a world where more people feel seen, more people feel safe, and more people feel like they are at home, like they belong. And maybe that is the measure of a holy community, and dare I say, a holy country. Not where everything feels familiar, but whether we can make room for stories that are not our own and still call them a part of us. I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.